The plate didn't just slip. It seemed to leap from Bianca's trembling hands, a final percussive act of betrayal from a body that had already endured too much. The crash of porcelain against the cold, unforgiving marble of the restaurant floor was a gunshot in the cathedral-like hush of Bella Vista. For a split second, every head in the dining room, a curated collection of the city's most affluent and influential, turned toward the sound, their expressions a mixture of mild annoyance and detached curiosity. A dropped plate, a clumsy waitress, a momentary disruption in the seamless tapestry of their perfect evening. But Bianca didn't see them. She didn't hear the sharp intake of breath from her manager or the condescending sigh from a nearby table. Her world had shrunk, collapsing, into the space occupied by a single table, a table she knew without looking was designated as number 17.3 years. 3 long, brutal, soul-crushing years since she had last seen him in the flesh. 3 years since he had stood in the cavernous, minimalist living room of the house they had once shared, a house she had decorated, a house she had thought was their home, and had calmly, coolly, surgically excised her from his life. He had handed her a suitcase, packed by the new housekeeper she had never met, and an envelope containing $1,000 in crisp $100 bills, a sum that was both an insult and a final, dismissive gesture of his power. "We're not right for each other anymore, Bianca," he had said, his voice devoid of the warmth she had once mistaken for love. "You just don't fit into my world." And now, here he was, Ricardo Almeida, the architect of her ruin, sitting at table 17 at Bella Vista, the most expensive, most exclusive restaurant in town. He was a portrait of effortless success, a living, breathing advertisement for the world that had no place for her. His designer suit, a deep charcoal gray that probably cost more than her car, fit his athletic frame perfectly. The watch on his wrist, a glinting marvel of Swiss engineering, was worth more than a year of her salary. Next to him, a woman was laughing, a sound that was a little too loud, a little too shrill for the hushed elegance of the room. She was stunning, in the way that a perfectly sculpted ice sculpture is stunning. Beautiful, cold, and entirely artificial. Blonde, of course. Ricardo had always had a type that had looked nothing like Bianca. The woman was clearly impressed by the absurdly priced menu, by the man sitting next to her, by the reflection of her own perfect life in the polished silver. Bianca Santos was only 28, but she felt as though she had lived 1,000 lifetimes since the divorce. Her body ached with a weariness that went beyond the 7-month swell of her belly, a constant, precious weight pressed against her spine, making every movement a conscious effort. She held the silver tray she had been carrying, now laden with empty champagne flutes, tightly to her chest, a makeshift shield against the ghost at the feast waitress. The voice cut through the haze of her shock. He snapped his fingers, a sharp, imperious sound that echoed from their shared past. It was a habit she had once found charming, a sign of his decisive nature. Now, it was the sound of a master summoning a servant. He hadn't even looked at her yet. His attention was still on the menu. His brow furrowed in concentration as he decided between the pan-seared scallops and the Wagyu beef. Bianca took a deep, shuddering breath, a small, desperate attempt to gather the scattered pieces of herself. She adjusted her black uniform, a garment that was now uncomfortably tight across her pregnant belly, a constant, humiliating reminder of her altered circumstances. She could feel the eyes of her manager, a stern, unforgiving woman named Mrs. Dubois, boring into her back. She had to move, she had to function. She approached the table, her feet feeling like lead weights on the immaculate marble. When Ricardo finally looked up from the menu, his eyes casually flicking from the page to her face, the world, for the second time in as many minutes, stopped. The color drained from his handsome, tanned face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. His mouth, the mouth that had once whispered promises in her ear, opened slightly, but no sound came out. His eyes, the dark, intense eyes that had once held a universe of affection for her, now darted from her face, down to her swollen belly, to the simple, functional uniform, and finally, to the small, plastic name tag pinned above her heart. "Good evening," Bianca said, her voice a marvel of control, the firmest, most professional tone she could muster. "My name is Bianca. Can I take your order?" Ricardo's girlfriend, the blonde ice sculpture, looked from Ricardo's stunned, silent face to Bianca's calm, composed one, her perfectly arched eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "Do you know her, honey?" she asked, her voice a high nasal drawl. Ricardo still couldn't speak. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost he had thought was long since buried and forgotten. Bianca watched, with a strange detached clarity. as the shock in his eyes gave way to a wave of profound, suffocating embarrassment, which was then quickly replaced by a flicker of barely concealed anger, as if her very presence, her audacity, to exist in the same rarefied air as him, was a personal, calculated insult to his perfect new life. "She's an old acquaintance," he finally muttered, the words thick and clumsy in his mouth. He couldn't look her in the eye. His gaze was fixed on a point somewhere over her left shoulder. An old acquaintance. The phrase was a small, sharp stab to the heart. 5 years of marriage, of shared dreams and whispered secrets, of building a life together, all reduced to the casual, dismissive label of an old acquaintance. She remembered a time when he had brought her to this very restaurant, to this very table, to celebrate the closing of his first major deal. He had called her my queen that night, his eyes shining with a love that she had believed was real. He had told her, his voice thick with emotion, that she was the most beautiful, most intelligent, most essential woman in the world, that he would be nothing without her. Of course, that was before she'll no longer fit into his world, before he had decided that a black wife, no matter how intelligent, no matter how supportive, no matter how much he had once claimed to love her, was a liability, a blemish on his new, elite, and exclusively white social and professional circles. Whose baby is that? The question erupted from Ricardo's mouth before his brain could stop it. A raw, reflexive query, born of pure, panicked self-interest. Bianca felt the familiar, sickening stab in her chest, the ghost of 1,000 past wounds. Even after 3 years, even after all the pain, he still had the power to hurt her with a simple, brutal question. "That's none of your business." "Ricardo," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. The girlfriend's frown deepened. "What do you mean, Ricardo? Who is this woman?" The embarrassment on Ricardo's face was now a palpable living thing. His new doll, his perfect, socially acceptable accessory, didn't know he had been married. He had probably sold her the same story he sold to everyone else. The story of a self-made man, a confirmed bachelor, a man with no complicated past, no messy emotional baggage, and certainly no black ex-wife working as a pregnant waitress at the fanciest restaurant in town. "Have you two decided what you'd like to order?" Bianca insisted, her voice a cool, professional shield. She gripped the small digital tablet in her hand, her knuckles white. But Ricardo wasn't paying attention to the menu. His eyes were fixed on her belly, a frantic, silent calculation happening behind his gaze. "How many months?" he asked, his voice a low, urgent whisper. 7, she replied, her voice flat. She saw the math click into place in his head. 7 months. The divorce had been finalized 3 years ago. There was no overlap. The baby wasn't his. And she saw, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, the wave of profound, unmistakable relief that washed over his face. It wasn't his problem. He was safe. "My God, Ricardo," the girlfriend whispered, her voice a horrified hiss, finally understanding the full, mortifying scope of the situation. "Your ex-wife works here." Ex-wife, the words spoken aloud, echoed through the elegant, hushed dining room like a bomb. A few of the customers at the nearby tables who had been pretending not to watch, now turned their full attention to the drama unfolding at table 17. The whispers began, a low, sibilant rustle of gossip and speculation. Bianca kept her posture straight, her chin held high, even as she felt the weight of a dozen curious, judgmental glances. She had learned to be strong over the past 3 years. She had had to. There had been no other choice. "I'll get another waiter to take your order," she said, her voice still calm, and she turned to walk away. "Wait," Ricardo stood up, his movements so abrupt that he knocked over his wineglass, the dark red liquid spreading across the pristine white tablecloth like a pool of blood. "Bianca, wait." She stopped, her back still to him. She could feel every eye in the restaurant on them now, a heavy, suffocating weight. "What do you want, Ricardo?" she asked, her voice tired. "I need to talk to you. 5 minutes, please." "We have nothing to talk about," she said, her tone professional but firm, the voice of a waitress speaking to a customer, not an ex-wife speaking to the man who had shattered her life. "You made that very clear 3 years ago." She remembered the words he had used during their last, terrible argument. Cruel, cutting words, delivered with the calm precision of a surgeon. Words about her not being classy enough, not sophisticated enough, to keep up with his rapid professional ascent. Words about how his important new clients, the old money titans of industry he was so desperate to impress, looked at him differently, with a kind of pitying condescension, when he showed up at social events with a black wife on his arm, the blonde, girlfriend was now visibly, profoundly uncomfortable. The delightful little drama had become a mortifying public spectacle. "Ricardo, let's just go," she urged, tugging at his sleeve. "This is embarrassing." But he wasn't looking at his girlfriend. He was still staring at Bianca's back, a strange, confused expression on his face. There was something about the way she carried herself, an unshakable, quiet dignity even in this most humiliating of situations, that bothered him, that didn't fit the narrative he had constructed in his own mind. He had imagined her broken, desperate, regretting the loss of the comfortable, luxurious life he had provided. This woman, this pregnant waitress with a steel in her spine, was not that. "Woman, how did you end up here?" he asked, his voice laced with a genuine, almost childlike confusion. During their marriage, Bianca had been his partner in every sense of the word. She had a degree in business administration, a sharp, intuitive mind for strategy. She had helped him build his company from the ground up, working late into the night, poring over contracts, offering insights that had saved him from countless bad deals, all without an official title, without a salary, without any of the credit. Bianca finally turned around. Her eyes, clear and steady, met his, and for the first time, Ricardo saw a strength there that he didn't recognize, a strength that he had never seen before. "Life teaches you a lot," she said, her voice quiet but resonant, "when you lose everything you thought you had in an instant." There was something in her tone, an almost dangerous calmness, a hint of something deep and powerful held in reserve, that made Ricardo feel a flicker of unease, a sense of a power dynamic that had shifted in a way he didn't understand. "Bianca," he started, not even sure what he was going to say. "Your order, sir," she interrupted, holding up the small tablet in her hand like a professional shield. Her expression, once again, neutral, impassive, the perfect waitress. Ricardo was speechless. The woman standing before him was no longer the loving, submissive, eager to please wife he had so easily discarded. There was a new strength there, a new resilience, something that made him, for the first time in a very long time, feel small, despite all his ostentatious, overwhelming wealth. As everyone in the restaurant watched the awkward, tense scene, none of them could have possibly imagined that this chance encounter was not, in fact, chance at all. And if this story of unexpected reunions and long overdue reckonings has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what was about to happen next would prove that sometimes, fate, with a little help from a determined, intelligent woman, reserves its best, most satisfying lessons for those who least expect them. The woman who had introduced herself as Sophia, a name she had uttered with a kind of self-important flourish as if it were a title, could not stop staring at Bianca. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of fascinated, condescending disbelief. "So, you're his ex-wife," she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur, though it was loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Wow, what an interesting situation." The condescending tone, the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head, cut through the air like a razor. Bianca maintained her professional composure, her face a neutral, pleasant mask, but inside, she felt the familiar hot pang of humiliation, a feeling she had, over the past 3 years, learned to metabolize, to turn from a poison into a fuel. "Ricardo never told me he was married," Sophia continued, her fingers toying with the large, perfect pearl that hung from a gold chain around her neck. She looked at Ricardo, a playful, predatory glint in her eye. "I wonder why that is." Bianca saw the embarrassment on Ricardo's face curdle into a familiar, sullen irritation. He had always hated being caught in a lie, especially a lie that threatened the carefully constructed image of himself that he presented to the world. During their marriage, she had learned to recognize all the signs of his volatile, explosive temper, the slight tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes, the way his right hand would clench into a fist at his side. "Sophia, let's just go to another restaurant," Ricardo muttered, his voice low and tight. But Sophia was clearly fascinated by the drama, by the unexpected power she now held over him. "No, honey, I want to have dinner here," she said, a cold, sweet smile on her lips. "It's so interesting, learning about your past." She turned that cold smile on Bianca. "It must be so hard, waiting tables when you're pregnant, especially for someone who, used to have a better life, right?" The words were a deliberate, calculated cruelty, designed to remind Bianca of everything she had lost, and for a moment, the memory of that last, terrible day washed over her with the force of a physical blow. 3 years ago, Ricardo had come home from a particularly important business dinner, a dinner she had not been invited to. He was visibly agitated, pacing back and forth across the vast white expanse of their living room like a caged panther. "Bianca, we need to talk," he had said, his voice strained, his eyes avoiding hers. "My company is growing very fast. I'm signing contracts with very important people, international people." She remembered the cold, sick feeling that had started to form in the pit of her stomach, and she had prompted her own voice, barely a whisper, and, "They ask questions, Bianca, about you, about us." He had finally stopped pacing and faced her, his expression a mixture of frustration and a strange, almost pleading desperation. "Some of my clients, my partners, they get uncomfortable when I show up with you at events." Uncomfortable, she had repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Why, Ricardo? Why would they be uncomfortable?" "You know why," he had muttered, turning away from her again. "No," she had insisted, her voice gaining a new, hard edge. "I don't know. Explain it to me, in words." He had finally exploded, his carefully controlled facade cracking under the pressure. "Because you're different from them, Bianca. You don't come from the same world. You don't have the same background. I have a degree in business administration, Ricardo, a postgraduate degree in marketing. I helped you build this company from a tourism office into what it is today. It's not about diplomas," he had shouted, his voice echoing in the sterile, silent house. "It's about class. It's about fitting in, and you just don't fit." The phrase, "fitting in," had echoed in her head for days, for months, for years. What Ricardo had really meant, what he hadn't had the courage to say outright, was that his black wife no longer fit his new, carefully curated image as a rising star in a world that was still overwhelmingly, suffocatingly white. 3 years later, watching Sophia, the perfect blonde accessory, peruse a menu of dishes that cost more than Bianca's monthly rent, she understood with a painful crystalline clarity the type of woman Ricardo had chosen to replace her. The type of woman who fit, you know, Sophia said, her voice loud enough for the entire section to hear. "It's funny how life turns out. One minute you're married to a successful, powerful man. The next you're serving dinner to him and his new upgraded girlfriend." Ricardo finally reacted, his embarrassment overcome by his anger at Sophia's public performance. "Sophia, that's enough." "Enough of what, honey?" she purred, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "I'm just making an observation." She laughed, a high, sharp, artificial sound that grated on Bianca's nerves. "I wonder what happened. Let me guess. It didn't work out because you two were just too different." Bianca felt the familiar hot anger rise in her chest, a righteous fury that she had suppressed for 3 long years. But she took a deep, slow breath, pushing it back down. She had learned, through bitter experience, that uncontrolled anger was a useless, self-destructive emotion. Intelligence, on the other hand, and patience, those were powerful, devastating weapons. "May I recommend the pan-seared salmon?" she said, her voice a model of calm, professional courtesy. "It's the chef's special tonight for special people." The subtle, layered sarcasm was completely lost on Sophia, but Ricardo caught it immediately. He shot Bianca a sharp warning look. He knew her too well not to recognize when she was playing a game. "Actually," Sophia continued, clearly on a roll, "it's probably a good thing it didn't work out between you two. I mean, can you imagine if you had had children? What a mess that would have been." The phrase hit Bianca with the force of a physical blow. During their marriage, Ricardo had always postponed the conversation about children. There was always an excuse. The company was in a critical growth phase. It wasn't the right time. They needed to be more financially secure. Now, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, she understood the truth. He had never wanted children. With her, specifically, with her. "The baby you're expecting?" Ricardo asked suddenly, his voice low and intense. "Who's the father?" Bianca looked at him, her gaze calm and direct, and delivered the verbal equivalent of a slap to the face. "Someone who isn't ashamed to acknowledge me in public." The words landed, and she saw him flinch. He knew exactly what she was talking about. During the last year of their marriage, he had started to avoid taking her to important social and professional events, always making up flimsy excuses about why it would be better or less stressful for her if she didn't go. "Where are you living?" he asked, quickly changing the subject. "Somewhere I can afford." "And the child's father? He doesn't help you?" "That's none of your business, Ricardo." Sophia, who had been watching this exchange with the gleeful intensity of a spectator at a Roman circus, now chimed in again. "Wow, what a difficult situation. Pregnant, all alone, working such a hard job." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes wide with false sympathy. "Well, at least you have a job, right?" Bianca forced a professional smile, a smile that, did not reach her eyes. Yes, she said. I do, and I am very, very grateful for it. What neither of them knew, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that Bianca hadn't gotten this job by chance. It wasn't a desperate last effort to make ends meet. For the past 6 months, she had meticulously, obsessively, researched every aspect of Ricardo's current life. She had discovered his new habits, his new routines, his favorite restaurants, his preferred dinner times, the women he dated. The job at Bella Vista, the most exclusive restaurant in town, had been a strategic, calculated move during the long, lonely, sleepless nights of her pregnancy. While she had been planning how to survive, how to build a new life for herself and her unborn child, Bianca had developed something much more interesting than a survival plan. She had developed a plan for justice. A man in a dark suit, the restaurant manager, approached the table, his face a mask of polite concern. Mr. Almeida, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there a problem here? Ricardo blushed, the public nature of the scene finally becoming too much for him. No, everything's fine. Excellent, the manager said, giving Bianca a brief, approving nod. Isadora is one of our best employees. We pride ourselves on treating all of our customers and all of our employees with the utmost respect. Isadora. The manager had called her Isadora. Ricardo frowned, confused. Isadora, he asked, after the manager had walked away. It's my middle name. Bianca replied simply, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. I decided to use it when I started my new life. It was a lie, a small, seemingly insignificant lie, but a crucial part of a much larger, more elaborate plan, a plan that Ricardo, in his arrogance, would never see coming. Sophia, finally bored with the drama now that the manager had intervened, waved her hand impatiently. Can we please just order? I'm starving. As Bianca took down their order salmon for her, a rare steak for him. The same meal Ricardo always ordered when he was trying to impress a new woman. She observed every detail. The way he still ran his hand through his hair when he was nervous, the way Sophia touched his arm possessively whenever another attractive woman walked past their table, the way he compulsively, obsessively, checked his phone every 30 seconds. Would you like to see the dessert menu? She asked, after she had finished writing down their order. No, Ricardo replied, his voice sharp, a little too quick. That will be all. He wanted her gone. He wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Bianca could feel the discomfort, radiating from him in palpable waves. Good discomfort was just the beginning as she walked toward the kitchen to deliver the order. Her back straight, her head held high. Bianca felt the baby kick, a strong, insistent thump against her ribs, as if she, too, was anxious for what was to come. Bianca placed a protective hand on her belly and whispered softly, so softly that no one could hear, "Calm down, my love. Mummy is just getting started." Each new humiliation Ricardo and his new girlfriend had heaped upon her had only served to fuel the cold, hard flame of her resolve. What that privileged man and his prejudiced plastic girlfriend didn't know was that every act of contempt, every condescending word, was just another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall of his own downfall. And Bianca had spent 3 long, hard years learning exactly how to be the architect of that destruction. In the days following the encounter at the restaurant, Ricardo couldn't get Bianca out of his head. He was haunted by the image of her, not as the weeping, broken woman he had cast out of his life, but as the calm, composed, and unnervingly self-possessed waitress who had looked at him not with regret, but with something that looked disturbingly like pity. For 3 years, he had comforted himself with the narrative that she was suffering somewhere, regretting the day she had lost him, regretting the loss of the luxurious, comfortable life he had provided. But the woman who had served his table, the woman with the quiet strength in her eyes and the steel in her spine, did not seem broken. She seemed prepared. Are you sure you don't know anyone else who works at that restaurant? Sophia asked for the 10th time that week, her voice sharp with an insecurity that was beginning to fray the edges of her perfect, polished veneer. Ricardo's dissonant, distracted behavior since their disastrous dinner at Bella Vista had not gone unnoticed. I don't know anyone, he lied, his fingers fidgeting nervously with his smartphone. What Ricardo didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was the extent to which Bianca had spent the last 6 months turning the study of his life into her full-time, unpaid job. She knew that he had dinner at Bella Vista every Tuesday and Friday night. She knew he always requested table 17, the one with the panoramic view of the city skyline. She knew that he brought a different woman there almost every month, always blonde, always a model or a social media influencer, always a woman who looked good on his arm and made no demands on his conscience. And more importantly, She knew that he had told every single one of them the same lie, that he had never been married. "How was work today?" Dr. Rafael Mendez asked, his voice warm and gentle, as Bianca walked into his small, cluttered office. On the outskirts of the city, the office was not glamorous, but it was a place of refuge, a place of justice. Rafael was a lawyer, a brilliant one, who specialized in labor rights and discrimination cases, but more importantly, he was the only man Bianca had met in 3 years who had never been ashamed to be seen with her, who had looked at her and seen not a problem, but a person. "Productive," Bianca replied, a small, tired smile on her face, as she placed a thick manila folder on his desk. "I got more photos." Rafael opened the folder and let out a low whistle. Inside were printouts of WhatsApp conversations, screenshots from various social media accounts, bank statements, and a series of photographs taken with a long-lens camera. For months, Bianca had been systematically, meticulously, documenting every aspect of Ricardo's duplicitous life. "My God," Bianca, Rafael said, his eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You have photos of him with 7 different women in the last 3 months. 8, she corrected, a wry twist to her lips. "You haven't seen the brunette from last week." Rafael was the father of Bianca's unborn child. They had met at a support group for victims of domestic abuse, a place Bianca had gone to try and make sense of the emotional wreckage of her marriage. He was a volunteer lawyer, offering pro bono advice. She was a woman trying to understand if what Ricardo had done to her, the years of subtle, soul-crushing psychological manipulation, constituted abuse. The answer, Rafael had gently helped her to see, had been a devastating "Uniquivoca, yes? Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Rafael asked, his hand covering hers on the desk, his touch a warm, grounding presence. "We don't have to. We can just move on with our lives. We can get married. We can raise our daughter. We can be happy. We don't need him." Bianca looked down at her belly, at the precious, innocent life that was growing inside her. "I don't want our daughter to grow up in a world where men like Ricardo get to destroy women and just get away with it," she said, her voice quiet but filled with an unshakable resolve. "I don't want her to ever think that it's normal to be discarded when you're no longer considered useful or convenient." Bianca's plan was simple in its concept, but brilliant and audacious in its execution. Ricardo had built his new, successful public image on a foundation of carefully constructed lies. To his conservative old money clients, he was the confirmed bachelor, the man who had dedicated his life to his business. To the young, beautiful women he dated, he was the man with no complicated past, no messy emotional baggage, a man who was reliable, available, and, most importantly, unattached. That entire fragile facade would crumble into dust if the truth were to come out publicly. "The messages you got from his ex-secretary are pure gold," Rafael said, leafing through a stack of printed documents, his lawyer's mind marveling at the sheer volume of evidence Bianca had amassed. "Patricia was always very thorough," Bianca said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in days. "And she never liked the way he treated me." The messages were devastating. 3 years of conversations, all meticulously saved by the disgruntled Ricardo instructing Patricia to make up excuses for why Bianca couldn't attend important company events. Ricardo complaining that his clients frowned when they saw him with her. Ricardo planning the divorce, stating in cold, hard text that an interracial marriage is not compatible with long-term business growth in this sector. It was all there, documented, dated, undeniable. "And the plan to expose all of this?" Rafael asked, his voice a mixture of awe and apprehension. Bianca took a deep breath, her eyes focused on a point in the distant future, a future she was actively, deliberately creating. "His company is closing the biggest deal in its history. Next week, a $28 million contract with a consortium of highly conservative, international investors. The celebration is going to be at the Continental Hotel, the most expensive hotel in the city. All of the most important clients will be there. He will be there with Sophia, introducing her to everyone as the woman of his life. And," Rafael prompted, though he already knew the answer, "and I'll be there, too," she said, a dangerous, brilliant light in her eyes. Rafael frowned. "How? You can't just walk in." "Same way I got the job at the restaurant," Bianca said, her smile a thing of pure, unadulterated strategic genius. "I got a job as a waitress for the event catering company." She looked at Rafael, and for the first time he saw the full, breathtaking scope of her plan. "Can you imagine his face," she mused, "when he sees me serving champagne too?" The very same rich, conservative clients he told he was never married to. But the plan was even more elaborate than that. Bianca had created a series of anonymous social media profiles, each one a carefully curated repository of the evidence she had collected, ready to be unleashed at the precise, optimal moment. She had prepared a complete, detailed dossier on Ricardo's lies, a timeline of his deceit, and most importantly, she had identified exactly which of his new clients were the most conservative, the most traditional, the ones who valued moral character and family values in their business partners above all else. Bianca, this is incredibly risky, Raphael warned, his protective instincts kicking in. What if he tries to hurt you? What if he gets violent? She asked calmly, her logic as cold and as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. By calling the police because the ex-wife he has hidden for 3 years has shown up at her place of work, by publicly admitting that he has lied to every single one of his business partners, to every woman he has dated, for the past 3 years. No, Raphael, he won't do anything. He's a coward. His only weapon is his image, and I am about to take that away from him. Raphael realized then that she had thought of everything, every angle, every possible reaction from Ricardo, every potential consequence. During the long, lonely years of her marriage, when Ricardo had been systematically, subtly making her feel small, and stupid, and inadequate, Bianca had developed the habit of observing, of recording, of remembering every detail. At the time, it had been a survival mechanism, a desperate attempt to understand what she was doing wrong, why she was never good enough. Now, that same habit, that same meticulous attention to detail, had become her most powerful, most devastating weapon. There's one more thing, she said, pulling a plain white envelope from her purse. I found out why he really asked for the divorce. The final straw. Raphael opened the envelope. Inside were copies of a series of emails between Ricardo and Mr. Thompson, the lead investor on the new $28 million deal. The emails were dated 1 month before Ricardo had asked for the divorce. I prefer to do business with men who share our traditional family values. Raphael read aloud from Mr. Thompson's email. An interracial marriage, while perhaps fashionable in some circles, demonstrates a lack of judgment that concerns me in a long-term business partner. $28 million, Bianca said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. That's how much he calculated I was worth. Or rather, that's how much he calculated that getting rid of me was worth. Raphael closed the envelope, his heart aching for the woman he loved, for the humiliation she had endured. Now what? He asked softly. Now, Bianca said, standing up, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. He's going to find out just how much it costs to lie about who you are, and he's going to find out that the woman he considered disposable has learned a lot about justice in the last 3 years. As she walked home that night, through the quiet, familiar streets of the neighborhood that had become her sanctuary, Bianca felt the baby kick hard, as if she, too, was anxious, was ready for what was to come. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered, her voice a fierce, loving promise, "Calm down, my love. Mommy and Daddy are going to give you a world where no one ever has to be ashamed of who they love." What Ricardo and Sophia and all the powerful people in their gilded world didn't understand was that publicly humiliating someone, casting them out, rendering them invisible, doesn't just destroy their self-esteem, it can also teach them invaluable, unforgettable lessons. Lessons about power, about strategy, and about the deep, satisfying, and long overdue pleasure of patience. Bianca had been the best, most attentive student they could have ever had, and now, it was time for her graduation. It was in that moment, 3 years ago, when everyone had laughed at her failure, at her dismissal, that something unexpected, something powerful, had begun to take shape. For a moment, when she had accepted the divorce without a fight, everyone had thought they were witnessing just another woman learning her place, another different person quietly disappearing from the lives of the people who mattered. Under the weight of all those past humiliations, her hands had trembled as she had signed the divorce papers. But anyone watching closely, anyone who had bothered to really see her, would have noticed that it was not fear that made those hands tremble. It was the contained, humming power of someone who was about to rewrite not only her own story, but the story of everyone who had ever dared to underestimate what a determined, intelligent woman can do when she finally decides that it is time to settle every last outstanding account. The grand ballroom of the Continental Hotel was a symphony of opulent, self-congratulatory success. The air was thick with the scent of expensive champagne, of imported flowers, of the collective, intoxicating perfume of money. The low, buzzing hum of conversation was a soundtrack of power, of deals being made, of futures being bought and sold. Ricardo Almeida, the man of the hour, circulated through the room, a triumphant, conquering hero. Sophia, a vision in shimmering gold, was permanently attached to his arm. Her smile as bright and as artificial as the diamonds around her neck. "I've never been married," Ricardo was saying, for what must have been the third time that night, to a portly red-faced investor from Zurich, always focused on the business. "But now that I've found Sophia," he squeezed her hand, a perfect, public display of affection. "Maybe it's time to think about starting a family." Across the room, a ghost moved silently through the crowd. Bianca, her 8-month belly carefully concealed under the loose-fitting black uniform of the catering staff, served champagne from a heavy silver tray. No one gave her a second glance. She was part of the scenery, as invisible as the velvet ropes and the gilded ice sculptures. She was just another faceless, nameless employee, there to serve the elite, until Ricardo turned a triumphant smile on his face, and saw her. The champagne flute, the one he had just raised in a toast to his own success, slipped from his hand. It shattered on the polished marble floor, the sound a sharp, discordant note. "In the symphony of the evening, what are you doing here?" he whispered, his face a mask of pale, horrified disbelief. "Working," Bianca replied calmly, her voice even and steady as she offered a glass of champagne to a nearby guest. "Champagne, gentlemen." Sophia, noticing her boyfriend's sudden panicked paralysis, followed his gaze. "Ricardo, what's going on?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing as she recognized Bianca. "Is that woman again?" But Ricardo couldn't answer. His eyes were scanning the room frantically, and he was noticing, for the first time, that several of the other waiters and waitresses were discreetly, efficiently, distributing something to the guests. They weren't tea-serving canapes. They were handing out plain, white, sealed envelopes. "What the hell is this?" Ricardo snarled, snatching an envelope from the hands of a confused-looking guest. He tore it open. Inside was a photograph, a beautiful, professional photograph of him and Bianca on their wedding day, smiling, happy, a lifetime of promises in their eyes. And behind the photograph were a series of printed documents, transcripts of his text message conversations with his ex, Patricia, conversations about how to get rid of his black wife in order to advance his career. The messages were devastating. They were dated. They were undeniable. "My God," murmured Mr. Thompson, the lead investor, the man who valued traditional family values above all else. He was holding an identical envelope. "Ricardo, you were married to her." A ripple of confusion and consternation spread through the room as, one by one, the guests opened their envelopes. The low, buzzing hum of conversation died, replaced by a tense, shocked silence, punctuated by indignant, whispered murmurs. The entire room, the entire collection of powerful men Ricardo had spent years cultivating and lying to, was now discovering the full, sordid extent of his deceit. Photos of him with 8 different women in the last 6 months. Emails where he had coldly calculated the financial cost of his inappropriate wife to his corporate image. Ricardo Almeida, voice, amplified by a microphone, cut through the tense, shocked silence. All eyes in the room turned to her. She was standing on a small raised platform that the band had just vacated, her pregnant belly now clearly proudly visible. "I believe you were just telling Mr. Thompson that you've never been married," she said, her voice calm and clear, echoing through the silent ballroom. "I think perhaps you've forgotten someone." She smiled, a cold, sharp, brilliant smile. "Would you like me to introduce you to my wife?" She paused for a beat. "Sorry, my ex-wife, the woman he discarded when he decided that a black wife was bad for business." Ricardo tried to move toward her, to stop her, but Sophia, her face a mask of furious, humiliated rage, grabbed his arm. "You lied to me," she shrieked, her voice a shrill, ugly sound. "You told me you were never married." "He lied to all of you," Bianca continued, her voice resonating with the power of a truth that had been suppressed for too long. "He lied to you because the truth was inconvenient. The truth was that he chose a $28 million contract over the woman he had promised to love and honor for the rest of his life. The investors, the powerful, conservative men whose approval Ricardo had craved, now looked from the damning documents in their hands to the desperate, panicked man in the center of the room, their expressions a mixture of disgust and contempt. Mr. Thompson, the man whose prejudice had been the catalyst for Bianca's dismissal, stood up. He took the $28 million contract he had just signed, and with a grand demonstrative gesture, he tore it in half. "Men who lie about their own history," he announced, his voice booming through the silent room, are not reliable partners for us. One by one, the other clients began to follow suit. Contracts were symbolically torn. Handshakes were publicly withdrawn. Ricardo stood frozen, watching his entire professional life, the life he had sacrificed his wife, his integrity, his soul, for, crumble into dust in a matter of minutes. Bianca, stop this, he begged, finally managing to break free from Sophia's grasp and stumble toward the stage. Please, stop what, Ricardo, she asked, her voice quiet but unyielding. The truth. She stepped down from the platform, and Raphael was there to take her hand, his presence a silent, steady declaration of his love and support. You said I didn't fit into your world, Ricardo, she said, looking him directly in the eye. So, I created my own. Raphael, in a gesture that was both tender and triumphant, slipped a simple, elegant wedding ring onto Bianca's finger, and kissed her softly, a public affirmation of a love that was not ashamed, that was not hidden, that was not conditional. And now, he said, his hand resting gently on her belly, our daughter will grow up in a world where no one ever has to be ashamed of who they love. The last image Ricardo had of his ex-wife was of her walking out of the now empty ballroom, her head held high, her hand held securely in the hand of the man who loved her publicly, proudly, unconditionally, carrying the child that he, in his blindness and his prejudice, had so carelessly, so cruelly rejected. Sophia had vanished in the chaos, a golden ghost, probably already scrolling through her contacts, looking for the next single millionaire. The waiters, Bianca's co-conspirators, were silently, efficiently, collecting the empty envelopes and the broken champagne glasses. In the space of 2 hours, Ricardo Almeida had lost his girlfriend, his reputation, his biggest contract, and the carefully constructed world he had built on a foundation of lies. In the parking lot, as Raphael held the car door open for her, Bianca placed a hand on her belly. The baby kicked hard, a strong, insistent thump. Calm down, my love, she whispered, a soft, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. Mummy and Daddy just gave you a world where you will never have to choose between love and success. But what even she didn't fully realize in that moment of triumph was that this night of spectacular, satisfying justice was only the beginning of a much larger transformation, not just in her own life, but in the lives of everyone who had witnessed how an underestimated, undervalued woman can rewrite all the rules of the game when she finally decides that it is time to collect on every humiliation, every injustice, every outstanding debt, with compound interest, and in doing so, regain not just her dignity, but her power. 6 months later, Bianca held her own daughter, a beautiful, healthy baby girl she had named Hope, in her arms as she watched Raphael sign the lease papers for the new, expanded office space for their law firm, Santos and Mendez, a firm specializing in labor law and workplace discrimination, was growing at an astonishing rate. 3 more major cases this week, Raphael announced, a proud, tired smile on his face. It seems your story has inspired a lot of people to stop being silent and to start fighting back. The story of Ricardo's public downfall had become a viral sensation. The video of the party, secretly recorded by one of Bianca's on the catering staff, had been leaked to the media and had racked up millions of views. The hashtag #BIAN, Kaz Revenge, had trended for a week. Ricardo had become a pariah in the business community, a cautionary tale, a man universally regarded as untrustworthy, a man whose word meant nothing. Did you hear he's living in a small rented apartment in the valley? Raphael commented, scrolling through a news story on his phone. He lost the penthouse and the divorce settlement with the first wife he never told anyone about. He had to sell the imported car, and Sophia, apparently, is now engaged to a 90-year oil baron from Texas. Bianca rocked Hope gently, a sense of quiet, profound peace settling over her. I don't feel sorry for him, she said softly. He had a choice. He chose the $28 million over a life with someone who truly loved him. He made his bed. Ricardo, she had heard, was now working as a salesman at a used car dealership, far from the glittering social circles he had once so desperately coveted. His former elite friends now pretended not to know him, avoiding any association with the man who had so publicly, so spectacularly, lied about his own history. Mummy, Hope babbled, her small hand reaching up to touch Bianca's face. It was the first time she had made a sound that even remotely resembled a word, and Bianca's heart swelled with a love so fierce it almost hurt. She will grow up in a world where she will never have to choose between love and success, Bianca whispered, kissing her daughter's soft, downy head. On her new, large, uncluttered desk, stacks of files awaited her attention. The firm was thriving, taking on the cases of people like her, people who had been discarded, dismissed, and discriminated against, but who were determined to prove their worth. Each case they won, each settlement they secured, was another small victory against a system that tried to define a person's value by the color of their skin, by their gender, by their social background. Ricardo had tried to destroy Bianca to protect his image, but in doing so he had ended up destroying himself, and he had, inadvertently, created her. He had forged her in the fires of his own prejudice, sharpened her with his cruelty, and fueled her with his arrogance. She had learned, through the most painful of lessons, that true revenge is not about repaying the harm that was done to you. It is about achieving a level of success, of happiness, of peace, that your enemies could never have possibly imagined for you. A year ago she had been a pregnant, heartbroken ex-wife, waiting tables, her future a terrifying, uncertain void. Today, sitting in her own prosperous office, with her beautiful daughter on her lap and the man who loved and respected her by her side, she realized that the humiliation, the pain, the injustice, had been the best, most transformative gift Ricardo could have ever given her. The best revenge against those who underestimate you is not to destroy them. It is to build something so magnificent, so meaningful, so undeniably successful, that they are forced to live forever in the shadow of the greatness they were too blind, too foolish, too prejudiced to see. If this story of justice, of resilience, of overcoming adversity has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that destiny always collects its debts, especially from those who believe they can discard human beings like they are disposable objects.